Hey everyone, sorry about the delay. I got tied up with another phone call. I know you guys have been waiting for a bit, so I'm not going to take long. We're going to get started right off the bat. Um, Today we're going to be covering commercial. It's a very important component of um, your mortgage lending operations, primarily because you actually see higher commission targets when you're working with commercial transactions. And more often for the last 6 months to a year, we've been seeing a lot more commercial transactions that are coming in. So this is an amazing opportunity for us to work off of the basic concepts of underwriting and what you need to do to be able to action on a commercial deal. That'll help you understand just the basic requirements that you have to filter through whether a client is someone who's actually going to be interested in performing a construction transaction or perhaps a commercial transaction or an apartment purchase transaction with you. So there's just a lot of information when it comes to commercial underwriting. I find it easier because I've been doing it for a while. It's very cookie cutter. There's no negotiational elements for commercial underwriting. You either check off the number of boxes or you don't. Commercial is easier because there's a heavier cost involved where, for example, a residential customer is probably going to go to 5 different shops to figure out what the rate pricing would look like. Whereas commercial, everyone understands that there's a specialization to it. So it ends up being a more attractive opportunity if you actually know your stuff. You can manage that conversation much better, and you're not going to expect the client to shop around. They'll always kind of walk the opposite direction to try and see if there's another option available, but it's harder for them to find someone. So if you secure that conversation at the very beginning and you work with the client and you're knowledgeable, and even though you may not know 100% of commercial underwriting, which I also maintain, I know I don't know everything, but as long as you know enough to be able to get the answers that they're looking for, to be able to structure the deal or get it in the right direction, that in itself will create a relationship for you so that on an ongoing basis, they will continue to communicate with you. So we're going to be starting off right off the bat. Um, Rosie, are you okay to manage the slides? Or did you want me to manage the slides? Mute, love.
I'm sorry about that. Whichever is much easier for you. I'm okay with managing it, but if
I don't
you would
think I
like
have controls. So let me get into this. Okay, so I would have to make myself the presenter, um, which I don't have access to. That's okay. We can, okay, so you just made me a presenter. Awesome. So let me see if I can, okay, so I'm okay to share. Just a thumbs up would be great, guys. If everyone can see, that would be awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, terrific. So commercial underwriting, it's basics 101. We're not going to be focused on the specifics because we're covering the broader subject of what kinds of transactions you would find happening in the market right now. My personal favorite is the development angle because we get an opportunity to be a part of the housing crisis and to try and fix that major issue. So there's a huge demand as far as commercial development mortgages are concerned. But we also know the kind of transactions they are. They actually take longer, but there's a flip side to it. They're typically anything over 10, 15 million, $20 million of a transaction size. So your commissions can also be as much as 150, 200, $300,000 for one transaction. Okay. All right. So the topics that we're going to be covering today: commercial mortgage types, how we can manage the starting point of commercial underwriting, what is the bare minimum documentation requirement so we know what to ask for, what to expect when we're starting to receive some paperwork, How does property evaluation work? Who to count on, who to rely on for that? Credit and net worth, what importance it plays in the file, in the approval. How to actually structure a loan, how to watch out for what needs to be shared, what doesn't need to be shared at that point. We always have to mitigate risk associated to the lending. So as a mortgage broker, your responsibility is whether or not this is actually going to qualify for those buckets that you are trying to submit it for. I want to take a moment here. For risk assessment, there are different risk types. So you can either work off of a CMHC program, which is fairly cookie cutter, which outlines for you, these are the requirements. This is what you have to achieve as a DCR, which we're going to talk about. And then if you shy away from that, that doesn't automatically mean that any other lender who's perhaps a private stance or a private lender status is not going to look at those same factors. They're all looking to make sure that they put in the money, they're going to get their money back, and they're going to make a reward on that. So they have a similar underwriting process in place, and they look at risk very similarly. Financial analysis, how to make sense of the deal, whether this is a deal that you want to be wasting time on or you want to be investing in. And then lastly, we're going to talk about finding a lender. One important component that I want to talk about, and there are a number of different avenues that you want to look at when you're trying to generate business, and everyone has their own approach. We're going to talk about a few, but one that has consistently provided me with a resource of leads and a resource of potential customers is connecting with the right people who have access to the customers that are looking for construction transactions, construction mortgages. So we'll talk a little about that as well. All right, so what kind of properties do we actually work with? What is our capacity? What cannot we do? What we can do? So office spaces, whether it's condominiums or whether it's actual office buildings, we're very comfortable with. Depending on the size and the location, they typically go to the bigger banks. They have a lot of comfort in being able to obtain up to 65 to 75% financing, depending on the location. In some cases, we also have access to up to 80% loan to value. And those cases are specifically when you're working with a professional category of business, for example, a lawyer, a doctor, a dentist, high cash flow positions, sometimes podiatrists are included in that, family clinics, pharmacies, they all have those specifics where you can actually achieve up to 80% financing. I've been asked this question before, so I'm going to address it now. Why would a customer want to work with a mortgage broker as opposed to directly with the bank? At the bank level, the way the infrastructure is set up, not everyone has absolute comfort with commercial. And that's one of the reasons why you have one person who's kind of partially responsible for commercial business management. And that person is basically just a referral point who identifies the opportunity perhaps with a doctor who's looking to set up a clinic. And this manager who's basically responsible for that commercial account is now going to request additional information and details from someone who specializes in that department. So there's a lag in communication, and many times the ball gets dropped. Also, when they're submitting, mostly head office is the one that approves or declines the deal on most commercial transactions. Because of those specifics, there's a lot of gaps in communication, as well as document collection can be a very painful process. So when you step in as a mortgage broker and having access to all these banks, whether or not they're working directly, they're still going to have to pay a fee towards the lending. So commercial transactions typically have a fee that will be applicable for the advance. Some cases that fee is as little as about $1,000. Some cases it could be almost 50 basis points, 75 basis points, even a 1% is a charge that I've seen depending on which bank you're working with. So when you step in, yes, you're going to have to charge your own fee because the bank typically doesn't pay you. In some cases, it does, but mostly you have to charge a fee on top. So the rebut to the customer is when you walk into the branch and look for a commercial transaction, you're going to have to work with whatever their requirements are, and you're not familiar with that criteria. Whereas I am, as a mortgage broker, I know what their criteria looks like. So when we submit versus when you submit, there's a distinct difference in how we structure the file because we know the criteria versus you submitting a case review that may or may not get approved. In that case, working with the broker is beneficial because you know exactly what the result is going to look like. And also, you don't shop around a deal which is going to be sitting at a 500 beacon limited net worth with Duca CU. You would probably shop that with an alternative product lender such as Home Trust for small commercial or an Equitable small commercial or commercial in general. And those are the differences that you create when you're working as a broker. So the office component was important because that is the largest um, number of transactions that we see for commercial. They're widely available. There's a lot of business and activity that happens around office purchases, refinances, development of shell units into an actual usable office system. And that's where the benefit comes into play, where you can advertise and market yourself as an expert in commercial as well. Retail is also similar. It has a little bit of a lower loan to value available, again, depending on the type of business. Commercial is very much about whether or not there's feasibility of whether that business is going to produce an income enough to qualify you in the future for serviceability. Industrial works on the same concept. Hotels is a little different beast, but the one inclusion that you have to keep in mind with hotel, the property value versus the loan to value versus the business model versus the business financials that you need to be able to support the income required to service the debt, they're all roughly the same across all these different types. What sets it apart for hotels is your vacancy rate. Your vacancy rate is defined as how many units or how many rooms are going to be vacant at any given point in time. And that is an industry average that is used, typically showing up in the appraisals, depending on where the property is located. So if you're looking at Niagara Falls, it's going to be a very low vacancy rate. Or if you're looking at downtown, it's a low vacancy rate. If you're looking around the Toronto airport or a different airport, it's a low vacancy rate. The deeper you go into cities, you're going to have a different vacancy rate applicable. And the job for the appraiser is to come back with the estimated vacancy rate in that specific area. The vacancy rate plays into a component of how well this file is going to be structured or how reliable this file is as far as revenues to service the debt is concerned. So that is something that has to be addressed based on previous projections, future projections and previous past history of your current business. So if you're looking at, let's say, 100 units or 100 rooms in a hotel, how many have been consistently leased out over the past year or 2 years of history is something that lenders will also look at. Malls. I love doing malls. They're easy. They're cookie cutter. There's a little bit of a stereotype to it. So let's talk about that so we can address how to manage that. So we're seeing more and more malls that are being purchased now are done so in groups. So you have 3 or 4 investors putting in their pool of money together so that they can purchase a mall. A mall is a strip mall or a strip plaza, or a mall is essentially a single floor operation or rental unit. It could be a number of rental units on a piece of land which have a rent roll coming out on a monthly basis. For example, I'm just imagining a plaza that has about 12 or 15 units. They're all commercial units, and they're being used for different businesses. So you've got an optical care center, you've got maybe a dentist in there, you've got a doctor in there, you've got a pet grooming salon in there, you've got a shawarma place. All those different units are typically operating on what we call a triple net lease. The taxes, the utilities, the rent is all paid for by the tenant, and the mall owner or the plaza owner is the one who is just collecting the rent on the basis of the location. It's a prime location. They've got a lot of tenant opportunities in that business plaza, which is why those locations go for a very high pricing on a per square footage basis. And this is one of the reasons why malls are very easy to finance, because they have a very strong rent roll coming through. Their business financials are very strong, and they service the debt very well because it's simply for the purpose of um, tenanting out business locations. The long-term opportunity of malls, and I don't know if you guys have seen this or not, we're starting to see this more often. At a certain point, when perhaps the mall owner purchased this land, could have been $3 million or $4 million as a price point. 10 years later, coming into 2024, he is now valued at about $15 million or $18 million for the same piece of land. The reason for the higher valuation is primarily because of the usable land. Many times you're going to find some gas stations connected to these business plazas as well. And when that's the case, the zoning is what permits these kind of plazas to exist. So if you're going to have a gas station, you're going to have a large volume of clients or customers coming through the gate. And because of that, there's a huge attraction to the nearby businesses that are operating in that plaza as well. So the reason the value goes up significantly is because at any point in time, if the environmental phase 1, phase 2 cleared, then this owner can always reutilize this piece of land for the purpose of condo development or a townhouse development if the acreage allows for it. And the attraction and the eventual purpose of use of this piece of land, which currently has a mall, is something that people look forward to, and that's one of the reasons why it's priced higher. Same thing applies with condominiums. So the reason I'm comparing the two is because from a mall perspective, if the mall is doing amazing, you can actually get a higher loan to value to convert this mall into a condominium, because starting from an $18 million valuation, by the time you build a condo on it, which goes at, let's say, $650 to $1,000 a square foot, within that range, sometimes even higher in Toronto, that will inflate the eventual value of this condominium to maybe 50, 60, 100, $200 million based on the number of units that you can occupy in that property. So that is why condominiums are also fairly easy to finance. However, there's a caveat. Nowadays, it's getting harder to finance condominiums because of the current condo market that we're in right now across the board, specifically in Ontario. But we're going to talk about that when we touch condominiums. There's a huge attraction to multifamily, smaller residential. So anything over 4 to 10 units, anything over 4 units up to 10 units is what we call a small multi-residential building or apartment or unit. They could be low rise, they could be high rise. Low rise is a terminology that we use up to 4 or 6 floors at times. High rise ends up being anything over the 6 floors. Low rise typically is a wood construction. High rise is typically cold form, concrete, iron usage. So there's a lot more strength to the number of floors that you can accommodate in that high rise building. So in cases where the number of floors are involved for apartment buildings, you would find that the city has to grant you a permit and allow for zoning to allow for anything over 4 floors or 5 floors or 6 floors. And that is what determines the value of the land too. Again, going back to the purpose of the property, if the land allows for 16 floors, that means, for argument's sake, if you have 10,000 square feet on a single floor, 16 floors means 160,000 square feet is what you're looking at. Sorry, 16 times 10. Yes, 160,000 square feet is what you're looking at. So 160,000 square feet could mean close to about 250, 300 units. And that is the difference. Sorry, I apologize. Let me take that back. In Toronto, going at, let's say, 500 or 1,000 square feet within that range, you're looking at approximately 80 to 100 units. But that is different from a low rise where you can only get away with maybe 24 units. And the number of doors that you can occupy in a building is what determines its eventual value as well. So we do apartment buildings as well. Apartment buildings slash condominiums. The difference that you need to understand is condominiums are typically built for resale. Apartment buildings are built for rental purposes. So apartments would be tenanted out. Condominiums end up going into pre-con and getting sold. We also do vacant farm land and development land. So vacant land by itself, just for the purpose of at some point in time utilization for build, or if it's farmland. Farmland is broken into two kinds. One is a regular working farm. The other one is known as a hobby farm. So if you go past, I live on the west side. I'm closer to Guelph, and in the region that I'm at, or if you were to go up towards Stouffville or further out to Cobourg or Port Perry area, you're going to find a lot of those farms that are working and non-working farms. So sometimes people have an equestrian farm or hobby farm where they have stables and they have like two or three properties, two or three dwellings on it. What could be a barn, what can be um, a separate unit to house some of the employees, and one is an actual residential actual property. So those kind of properties, which we call hobby farms, may allow for some farming applicable to it, but they're just doing that to keep things going on a positive note for finances. They're they may range anywhere between 5 to 50 to 100 to 200 acres. There's no cap on it. But if you have an actual working farm, then the working farm has at least 75 to 80% of utilization of the piece of land that's going to be dedicated to crops. And that is what the main difference is between a hobby farm and an actual working farm. So for hobby farms, the way financing works is you have a dwelling on it. So the appraiser comes in, takes a value of that specific property, and then up to 5 or up to 10 or up to 15 acres, depending on what the financial institution is. So Home Trust has a cap on it for 10. CW has a cap on it for up to 5 acres. Even though you could have 83 acres behind it or 52 acres behind it, that value is not taken into consideration. That's just land that you have access to at some point in time. If it becomes developable, then that's awesome. But as of right now, if you have a dwelling on it, then they're going to put a cap on how many acres apply to it. And then you have development land, where development starts off with bare land or perhaps a construction that's already on it, and then it transitions into phase one, phase two environmental, and then it transitions into site permits, and then you have the ability to build on that piece of land, which is where development financing comes in and land acquisition financing comes in. So construction mortgages are somewhat similar to development mortgages. Development mortgages are for the purpose of developing the land for the purpose of construction. So the mezzanine financing between land acquisition and getting up to construction is what we call development financing. So let's talk about land acquisition and servicing. So basically financing for the purchase of the land and soft costs for the servicing of undeveloped land. Financing on raw land for residential and commercial development projects that are currently in the site plan or in a rezoning process. So site plan is an outline of what the city has agreed to that you can possibly build this. It takes into consideration the architectural level. It doesn't take into consideration detailed drawings, for example, electrical or HVAC or civil is not taken into consideration to a great detail. It's just a basic layout that we're looking to put, let's say a gas station here, or we're looking to put a development of 15 townhomes there. And then there is some additional information that's provided to the city to cater to perhaps an accounting for how many people are going to be there, how many units are you going to be selling, what kind of a population you're looking at to draw into that specific piece of land. Is it going to be low, medium, or high density residential area? So all those angles are taken into consideration on a site plan. Rezoning is perhaps the piece of land was zoned as agriculture, which means it's specific to crop growth It's specific to a working farm. Now your objective is to transition away from that agricultural zoning permitted by the city into perhaps a low medium residential zoning, which means you should be able to build townhomes on that piece of land. So that rezoning process is something that the architecture team goes through to work with the city, submit the proposal, and then they come back and say, yes, we're going to be able to do it or not. Generally speaking, looking at a piece of land, any developer or anyone who's looking to build on it can go to the city and ask without any hoops to having to jump through over. You can simply go to the city and ask, hey, this is a piece of land I'm looking at. Can you please provide me whatever information you have on it? And then the developer will have access to what they call a base understanding of what the zoning options look like. And in the zoning bylaws, you will see whether or not you can convert this into a residential development or commercial development or employment zone. And if for any reason, I'm just giving you weird examples so that you understand how to address those concerns if a customer were to ask. So a customer is looking at an agricultural zoning at the moment, and it also allows for an M2 zoning where you can park trucks. That zoning cannot be instantly converted into a residential zoning, which accommodates townhomes of a value of, let's say, 30 townhomes on that piece of land. For that purpose, if you have to request a rezoning, you actually have to go to the Committee of Adjustments with the city. And that bylaw document is going to allow for whether or not that's convertible immediately, or if you have to jump through the hoops to be able to get the approval with the city by going to the Committee of Adjustments and requesting an adjustment to the current bylaw, which allows for that specific zoning. The types of mortgages that are available on these kind of properties. So when you're doing land acquisition, it's hard to achieve anything over 50% loan to value, and that's true even in Toronto. Unless you have a beautiful piece of land, which is downtown Toronto, which you know the value is going to be ridiculous, and you know that there's a lot of opportunities that you can create out of that piece of land. Unless that piece of land is in question, generally speaking, you're going to get a cap from the lenders, maybe to 50 to 55% loan to value on these kind of transactions, which is strictly land. The further you go out from the GTA, the harder it's going to get financing. We have a number of lenders that are comfortable with land, and as long as we have a projected use of the property and a timeline for how long that property is going to be usable, we have a lender for that. I'll give you an example. If it's a working farm, which is in the future development possibility of maybe 2 to 3 years down the road, then those kind of properties, once held for 2 to 3 years, the city would be open to looking at that project or looking at that piece of land for the purpose of development. If that's the case, then lenders would be okay with up to 50% on that piece of land. And the reason that would work out to the benefit of the developer or the owner is because he's buying that piece of land at perhaps $1 million an acre. So let's say if it's a 3-acre lot, it's going to be going for roughly $3 million. He's going to have to front 1.5 million. You're going to be able to get financing up to 1.5 million. But because year after year, coming in closer to the city's projected timeline to be able to build on that piece of land, every year the value of that land is going to go up from, let's say, $3 million. It's 2 years down the road, later valued at about $5 million. Your loan amount continues to be 1.5 million, but now your equity has gone up considerably, which means you can either cash out at this point or you can go into development. So when they go into development, that additional equity of about 3.5 million is what they're going to use towards the build or their money in the pool of resources so they can start building on the project. So prepayment options are available. Generally, you want to hold land for a minimum of 6 months, and then there are up to 2-year terms available as well. If this is a strictly private transaction, then mostly you're going to see a 1-year term. A number of lenders that are comfortable with this kind of a transaction are MCF, Hillmount, Equivest. They're these kind of lenders which have large pools of monies that are working as mortgage investment corporations will generally be okay with the kind of transactions that would be coming with an exit strategy over the next 2 to 3 years as a timeline. Okay, so postponed and subordinated equity and mezzanine loans to help you meet your financing obligations, generally considered as an alternative for companies that banks have turned down because the cost of the business is much lower than the equity in the terms of far more favorable compared to senior debt. What that really means is if you already have a first mortgage on the piece of land and now you need perhaps $1 million to come up with architecture, to come up with civil and site plan permits for submission, and you also have to do traffic impact study, or you also have to do environmental phase 1, phase 2. All those things have a cost, a significant cost based on the kind of land. So if you're looking at, let's say, 3 to 5 acres of a lot, you're going to end up spending at least $40,000 to $50,000 for a traffic impact study. If you have an environmental phase 1, phase 2 that needs to be achieved, sometimes it can be as much as $100,000 to $200,000 depending on what the effort requires. So those specifics will require additional money, which you may not want to front. So if you get to a point where you've submitted the site plan and you have somewhat of verbal approval from the city, there's some notes or a letter of intent or consideration that you can receive from the city as a document. And you can take that document back to the lender and you can say, hey, I'm about 2 years out from this build, and I want to be able to invest in this build. I'm looking for about 500 or 500,000 or $1 million to cover my costs so I can get to a point where I'm going to be permit ready so I can start selling the units. And that's when the mezzanine financing kicks in. So generally, it would be a second mortgage, but it's what we call a tranche financing or an interim financing that would have a timeline of perhaps 6 months to 12 months so that you can complete your permits and get it ready to a point where your selling is ready. And that duration will kick out the first mortgage and kick out the mezzanine financing and then get you into an entirely new financing, which possibly could be with an institution or with a private lender, but it would eliminate the first and the tranche or the first and the mezzanine financing, allowing you to move on to the bigger pasture, which is an actual financing for the purpose of construction and development. So just as a reiteration, on the right-hand side, loan amounts up to 80% loan to value and 85% loan to cost. These loans are available, but they're available for apartment constructions. Like I told you guys, the difference between a condominium development versus an apartment building, if you're looking to build for the purpose of renting out, you actually have terms anywhere from 1 to 5 years under the CMHC program, which we're also going to talk about. So bridge financing is similar to mezzanine financing, depending on what the purpose of it, what the purpose of that financing is for that duration. So interim financing options for properties under development require short-term financing solutions, also known as mezzanine financing, which combines debt and equity to give the developers flexibility for funding. And they are far less stringent because they're equity-based. And it's not just equity-based. Like if you have a residential property, you can go up to 80% loan to value. There's marketability there. There's an opportunity to be able to sell and recover the funds. In case of a project, which is a land or any kind of development in general, people are very particular, and that's the reason why they cut it off to about 55 to 60% loan to value. In case of bridge financing, you have some areas, if you were to qualify under a CMHC construction program, and if you fully qualify as a builder, and we're going to talk about the qualification requirements as well, but you can get anywhere between 50 to up to 90% loan to value with terms as little as 6 months all the way to 2 years. And these institutional financings backed by CMHC are available as long as you qualify. So if you're doing an apartment building for investors that are looking at apartment buildings, and this is where your brain starts churning and recognizing the kind of clients you'd be interested in working with. So if it's a customer who's looking to invest in a $2-3 million property, understands that he can build perhaps 80, 100, 150 units. Those are the kind of customers you want to work with to get them the financing for up to 80 to 90% loan to value. Again, subject to review by CMHC on land, rental opportunity, and the exit strategy from that loan as well. Construction financing, simply put, short-term financing, which is paid out in advances. So let's say you get an approval for $25 million. You don't get the full amount of money day one. You actually get it in 8 or 10 or 15 different phases, depending on progress. So you've completed the foundation, you get 10% release, so you can pay, so you can recover part of your payments that you've made to the foundation crew. Then you build it up where you have the exterior or the interior being applied, or you're running cables and you're doing electrical and HVAC and you're doing plumbing. So every stage has its own percentage of what the lender or the bank will pay. And this is important to understand because this is something that clients ask me all the time. My question is, okay, well, what are you bringing to the table? If you're running a project for about $10 million, that's the eventual value of it. What are you putting on the table? How much money are you bringing to the table? So the answer typically is, well, we have financing for that, right? I've already got the equity in my property at a value of $2 million. So let's get going. Let's wrap it up. And my response is just the way things work with lenders. You need more than 20% if you're going to be building a project with financing. So in case of CMHC, they're a little more flexible, but they also rely, let me clarify that. They're more flexible in funding because they understand that you're a builder, but they're far stringent in qualification because they want to understand that you're a veteran builder and you're not going to be stuck with this project last minute. So for that reason, you have to use your own money up front before you can actually recover, which is why the general typical requirement for a project that you're doing as a construction out of CMHC is about 35% of your own money that you need to be able to plug in. And the way it works is 20% is your equity or you're down. You need to have at least 15% above and beyond in cash. And that cash is going to be utilized to build the foundation so you can receive the money back. Then you're going to be going into trades, which you're going to be spending the money on progress by progress. Then you're going to get reimbursed by the lender. The lender doesn't pay you up front so you can pay the trades. The lender requires you to use your equity and get compensated for and reimbursed so that they can continue with that project. About financing, this is fairly simple to explain. It's just an equity takeout. Like in case of a residential build, if you have achieved a certain progress mark and you're perhaps 87% complete on a 100-unit condo or a 100-unit apartment building, you can go to the bank and you can extract up to a certain amount of equity to plug it into another project. And this is something that we've done a lot for clients who are builders, who are responsible for construction companies. So they're working on one project, they're fully exhausted, but they have another opportunity, another piece of land that they're looking at. And the continuity of the business depends on being able to find yet another. For that reason, they've tied up all their equity in this property and they're looking for a couple of $1 million to purchase another property. So for that reason, we have the ability to go up to 75% loan to value in some cases, because we're going to be able to use part of that money and arrange for financing for the second transaction while using some of the money here and putting a blanket mortgage on the next transaction as well. So I'll explain this one more time. You have property A. The property A is sitting at about 87% complete and has $5 million on equity available. The customer needs $2 million of accessible equity so that he can put in a deposit and a down payment for another transaction that he's doing for $5 million on a piece of land in a different location. So when he puts down that $2 million, out of that $2 million, you're going to expect at least $500,000 going into multiple actions like environmental, traffic impact, review, surveys, architecture drawings, site plan submission. So assuming he's putting in $1.5 million into a $5 million purchase, what we have personally done is we take the 1.5 million out of the current property A, we plug it into property B, which ends up being your down payment, and then we also find financing on property B up to 65%, depending on location, obviously. And that is how you're able to convert two transactions instead of just one as an ETO. If the guidance is there, you're going to be able to act as a subject matter expert to the customer, to the client. Generally speaking, builders are comfortable with the information that you share with them. They kind of start relying on you, and you become the go-to person for any questions that are being asked related to commercial financing. And if you achieve that on the basis of your own interest or by reading up or by attending these courses, you'll have a deeper understanding of finance for commercial underwriting, which will allow you to be able to communicate that information, which means the client is going to be committed to working with you in the long term as well. So loans that are set up as takeout financing can also be used for the purpose of upgrades or enhancements to the building. I'm going to use two examples. So let's say there's a small residential up to 10 units, low rise, 5 units on each side, small parking lot valued at $5 million. It's fully paid off. There's no property, there's no lien on it, there's no first charge on it. This is where our institutions would come in and offer that financing for the purpose of allowing that person to access equity so that they can either improve the quality of the build, renovate it, or in some cases, the same thing can be applicable to a condominium. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Dixon condos in Mississauga. Those condominiums have a very high condo status fee. And the reason they're 1,100 square feet condo fee is closer to about $800 is because their renovation costs and upkeep costs and maintenance costs are very high. So using that as an example, there was an issue with the insurance company because of which they didn't get paid out. They obviously had to cater to their residents, and everyone's an individual owner in that condominium. So the amount of money that they're putting in into a condo fee ends up being what you call a reserve fund for a condominium property. So that reserve fund, which is a pooled amount of money, is what gets used to perhaps the maintenance of a roof or the maintenance of a parking or the maintenance of security, gates, everything that counts as common elements. So any one of those common elements that need upgrades, or maybe there was a fire hazard, or maybe there was a complication with the management company, they stole money, whatever the case might be, you have the ability to go back to one of our banks, Equitable as an example, Home Trust as an example, Equivest as an example. These lenders have the ability to finance condominiums because they're seeing a consistent cash flow coming into the property. What that means is if you've got 100 residents paying $800 a month, so that's $80,000 that you're seeing as a revenue come into the equation, which can be helpful for the purpose of getting the financing that you need to keep up with the property requirements. So those takeout financings are also available as an option. Okay, so let's talk about commercial underwriting. We've broken it into 8 simple steps. It's a little more complicated, but as long as you retain these 8 steps, the specifics of each one of these 8 steps are not, sorry, 9 steps are not relevant. I call them 8 steps because the 9th one's really just closing. So the conversation with your customer could go in any which direction you want it to, but you have to maintain the starting point as the application. And the reason for that is when you're working with a client, we need to understand who the client is. On commercial applications, most properties are owned under a corporation. What that also means is that the corporation is going to need a personal guarantee to apply for a mortgage or a loan. And understanding the client's current situation his credibility, his net worth, his overall profile is important because the property by itself doesn't hold the ability to get financing. So when you get an application, we actually have a commercial application in the commercial agent resources section. If you want to look at that, please do so. It's, I think, 3-4 pages. You don't have to use the service agreement. It is there to protect you. The 4 pages also include a list of documents, which we're also going to discuss right now. But ideally, you want to get that application signed off. That gives you a 360 around the customer. It lets you put yourself into a professional attire so that you can control the transaction very well. It also gives you a clear indication of what his assets look like, what his net worth looks like, whether or not there's an opportunity to complete this transaction or not. When we're looking at the personal net worth, it's one of the most important documents in commercial underwriting. The starting point is an application because when we know who the accountant is, we can also prep for business financials. We can get their validations and verifications from those sources. Sometimes we need to know who the lawyer is because specific lawyers need to do the commercial transactions. So that can be helpful in understanding the overall profile for the client as well. We're going to talk about document collection. Document review is something that I would encourage you to do with myself if it's a commercial transaction. If you're comfortable doing it, get it to a point where you have all the documents and then you can bring it up to me. Or if you want to work on your own, that's perfectly fine too. You can reach out to lenders, create a learning curve out of that. That's perfectly, that works fine with us. The underwriting team is not well versed in commercial underwriting. I'm the one who's responsible for that. So if questions come up, feel free to call me directly and I'll help you further. Sourcing lender interest, an important part of underwriting. You need to get a touch and feel of who's going to be okay with it. So generally at this point, you should have some level of indication, perhaps a past appraisal or a purchase sale agreement in place, so you know what the costing looks like for the purchase, or even if it's a refinance, there would have been some level of appraisal done in the past that you can request a copy for. Once you have figured out whether this lender is actually going to be able to accommodate the funding or the closing, and if they have some level of interest, at that point in time, the brokerage or you have the right to issue what we call a letter of intent. The letter of intent is a document that's available in Agent Resources, and if you want, you can use that. You are licensed. If you're comfortable with that, you can go ahead and proceed. But keep in mind, though, if it's a private, you need to be level 2 to operate that. If you're not a level 2, then you can't touch it. As long as it's institutional, you can do so. MICs are not institutions. MICs are private lenders. So shy away from that and do not issue a letter of intent if you're not level 2. Retainer. So anything over $400,000 of a transaction requires a retainer, especially any kind of commercial. Commercial is harder, generally speaking. It's a longer duration that's required to complete a transaction. It's a lot of communication. The client perspective doesn't change. They're still going to want to know the information on a daily basis, even though there's no update. So that client broker relationship, to be protected, we charge a retainer fee. So the retainer fee is, depending on the transaction, anywhere between 25 basis points to 50 basis points sometimes. For example, if it's $1 million transaction, we would charge something like $2,000, $2,500. If it's a $5 million transaction, we would go up to almost $5,000, depending on what it is. $2,500 to $5,000 is average. So retainers are required. They go directly to the brokerage trust account, and they're held against that deal so that we know we're not going to be using those funds, and we know that the client is committed. So if you already arranged for lender interest, preparing for a submission, having spoken with a number of lenders, now you're structuring the deal, you're putting paperwork together, you're creating a DCR that works for the lender, and you're putting in all the paperwork so that the lender is comfortable with a full review. The lender typically would take about 4 to 6 weeks for an initial review, so they can issue a letter of intent of their own, or in some cases, they can go straight to the commitment. Once the letter of intent has been signed, or once the approval commitment has been signed, you have the option of collecting another retainer for your performance, because you don't know if this client is now going to take this approval and shop it on you, but it's a good idea to do so. But if you're comfortable the way you are, not a problem. You can continue breezing past, and you can go into funding mode as well. So the document requirements, essential document for commercial underwriting and ensuring completeness and accuracy. I think we're missing a slide here. Oh, no, we're not. So this is a slide that helps you understand the mortgage application on the right-hand side. We've used this as an example of what information you should be collecting from the client. I would not recommend, like we do in case of residential transactions sometimes, we just have the client complete the application and then it comes back. Or sometimes it's incomplete and then they just have their initial and signatures at the bottom. Don't do that. You actually need to rely on this information for the commercial transaction. You need validated, documented information. Like I said at the beginning, there's just a lot of information for commercial. So it's better to have a documented approach to all the content that you're receiving. So we're going to present the loan paperwork if it's a first mortgage or a second mortgage. So whatever current charges they have, we need clarity on what that loan statement looks like or mortgage statement looks like. We also want a personal net worth statement. When you're doing that, you're required to break down all the properties, addresses, equities, and the present values associated to that property. So a person may have 10 properties. We have an Excel sheet for the net worth statement that's very specific to identifying how much equity do you actually have. Use that net worth statement. I also recommend, and there are a number of documents that are available in agent resources. I'm actually going to drop them in here as well. You have the option of using a personal net worth statement, a calculator, which calculates the net operating income on a rental property, or if it's a pro forma, which allows you to evaluate and assess a development plan, or if it's just an analysis on the rental opportunity that you're trying to purchase. These 3 or 4 Excel sheets are made available under the commercial folder inside of worksheets. I strongly recommend on your websites to use this as a downloadable document upon collection of the lead. And your new CRM allows you to be able to do that in real time. So if you have a commercial landing page, which you do, and if you wanted to collect the lead, you can easily outline, download either one of these documents, and the pop-up comes up and it gives you the option of putting in your information, your name, phone number, email address, and that can be your lead capture system as well. Those Excel sheets are valued sheets. They are hard to find, and the fact that you have access to them can be a source for lead gen, for value-driven customer acquisition. Articles of incorporation. Generally speaking, if you're looking at the latest PDF versions that are coming out of Service Canada and Service Ontario, whether it's a federal, whether it's a provincial, these documents are typically about 3 to 4 pages. The older ones about 7 to 11 pages, depending on the schedules associated to it. So that is a requirement. What's important about the articles of incorporation is like I said earlier, there are a number of investors typically on each transaction. So having the right count of directors, knowing who those directors are, and having the directors show up on the application is very important. If you have a PSA, get the PSA. If you don't have a PSA, that's fine. In some cases, if it's a gas station, I'm using that as a very basic example, you will require an environmental phase 1 and phase 2. An environmental phase 1 and phase 2 is an evaluation that is done by data scientists or geologists that are working in the property industry that dig in the land and go down maybe about 5 feet or 10 feet, depending on what the requirement is for the banking institution. And they have provisions that require the Ministry of Environment to be alerted if there's an issue with the environmental. For example, there's an oil leak inside of a gas station tank, underground tank, and that oil leak is causing hazardous waste to be released into the soil. So the soil isn't something that you can grow on. The soil isn't something that you want to build a residential home on. So for that purpose, there may be a remediation required. So an environmental phase one, phase two ties in to certain transactions. In builds, when you're doing residential, it is required. When you're doing commercial, it's not an issue. You could be building whatever you want. You can get away with just environmental phase one. You also have what you call a hydrogeological and geotechnical report, which outlines the property. Sorry, I'm fumbling. Which outlines the property. What do you call it? The crusts and the troughs. The continuity of the property. How straight is the property in a linear line? If there's a lot of rocky foundation or a rocky terrain under the main soil, how much water is in those rocks or in those soils, how deep the water sits, how far is the water table inside the ground. Those angles are pointed out in a geotechnological and hydrogeological report. If you already have a rent roll, awesome. If not, then you can download a rent roll statement and you can share it with your investor or your customer, and they should be able to complete that for you. Generally speaking, whenever you have at least 5 or 7 units, they know what a rent roll is and they would have something already in place. It's simply an accounting of how many units you have, what the square footage is, what the per month rent is, when was the lease signed initially, how much money is coming through, whether utilities are included or not. All that content is included in that rent roll. So this document, this slide outlines 3 years. 3 years isn't always required. You could get away with 2 years. The 2 years of business financials generally required to see the trend behind consistency of income. So if you're going to be in losses for the last 2 years, clearly the funding is questionable. But sometimes the rent roll covers it, but you don't actually show a large profit. And that rent roll is going to be helpful to determine whether or not your DCR, which is your debt coverage ratio, or DSR, debt service ratio, works to the benefit of the bank. So if you don't have it, then request it. T2s can be replaced, but it is required for us to review the paperwork and to understand a commercial transaction. So even if you're buying an office, in some cases, if you're buying the office for the first time, if you're a sole proprietor, if you're making enough money, then the business financials would be replaced with your T1 generals and NOAs because you're making enough money and now you're setting up an office. So in some cases, if that property is being tenanted for a further investment or further rental income, then you may be able to get away with it. But if you're the company, you're the one who's housing that property, then it's only fair to see whether the business that's going to be housing that property is profitable or not, whether it's going to be able to afford it or not. So that is why the business financials are requested. Sometimes we request for the land title document. We want to see what charges are on the property, whether the title is clean or not. We had a case scenario yesterday with an agent where there was a lien on the property. The insurance company didn't pay out. So there's a $700,000 judgment and a lien against that title. And those are the things that you want to know ahead of time so that you can work on a file properly. Sometimes we have some companies that are registered with Duns and Brads, so they may be able to provide you with a commercial credit report. It's not a requirement. We always need a personal credit report. So if you don't want your client to get dinged, then we need to see the report. This is not like residential where we can assess. We need to see the report to understand where he stands. Commercial transactions, and I've seen this trend with a lot of owners that are operating in as investors or commercial property owners, they have had to jump through a number of hoops to get financing. And in the process of doing so, they go through brokerage A to D to F to Z. And you see a lot of hits. And even though they're still making money, in some cases, you're actually going to see a 550 beacon on someone who's got a net worth of about $7 million. So that's okay. There are provisions around it. Obviously, if you're going to be bankrupt or you're on a consumer proposal, that changes things. But if it's a lower credit score, it's not the end of the world. but a good credit score is required for the purpose of a good institutional transaction. Property tax statement, it's generally asked for, so we can use the assessment value on that as well, and we can see whether they're paid up in full or not. We do require an appraisal. If they don't have an appraisal, then the moment you collect the application, the next thing you need to ask for in a commercial transaction is the appraisal. And we'll talk about that too. And then just the ID requirements to make sure there's no fraud alerts there. So property evaluations, these are just some of the appraisers that you end up using. So there are two different titles. One is a Canadian real estate appraiser, and the other one is known as a AACI. So an accredited one has the ability to do commercial transactions. There are quite a few of them. I forgot to mention, Rosie, we should add Crosstown in there too. They do small commercials as well. So the idea behind listing these is not every lender is going to be okay with Cushman. Not every lender is comfortable with Empire. This is just a broad picture of the most generally used appraisers. I like to rely on Avison. I've known them for a very long time. I've seen some hotels. I've done some financings for hotels that fell through last minute because Colliers came back with a higher appraisal that the lender wanted. Empire is specific to smaller CUs and smaller banks, so we've used that. Smith & Irwin is comfortable with the outside of GTA areas. Every single one of these guys will travel if you will pay them. So an appraiser will generally charge of this caliber, of this kind of an assignment, will generally charge on a value of, let's say, $5 million, anywhere between $5,000 to $10,000. I'm going to say this again. On an evaluation, expected valuation, a property value of about $5 million, you can expect to pay anywhere between $5,000 to $10,000. The scope of work is also important. But just an example, we recently paid $10,000 plus HST for a property that was valued at $1.6 million. It included time, it included the comparables, it included additional research on eventual build value. So depending on what your scope is, what your lender is looking for, and what you need, always have a very open, frank conversation with your appraiser so that they know what to come back with. It's going to cost you more if they have to rewrite the appraisal report again. How to manage the customer expectations on this? Mr. Customer, a commercial transaction will require a full review. A full review requires an appraisal. Without the appraisal, no one's going to fund you. And I maintain this as far as private mortgages is concerned, as well as commercial. No one can evaluate a commercial property except for an appraiser. There's no such thing as Purview that works for it. There's no such thing as Brook Street AVM models. None of that works because every commercial property is unique. So if you ever want to go through a list, there's a database with Appraisal Institute of Canada, and as long as the designation works, you're fine. So focus on AACI. Do not use a CRA. Do not use a DR. AACI is the standard for the requirement. So on the right-hand side, you're going to notice the numbers that are charted out. This is a snapshot out of what we call a net worth statement. This is important to understand what your current liquid assets look like for the purpose of a build or for the purpose of an acquisition, or even in case of a refinance. So the net worth statement and the credit are the two most important things to collect on a file when it's a commercial transaction. So let's just go through the key indicators of what we need to assess a file. So when we're doing an evaluation, we have the number of credit check inquiries that we've done, the credit score by itself, which is known as a FICO, and then you also have another score by the name of BNI. That's also looked at. Your total net worth is looked at. How much of it is actually available funds, which means how much is liquidatable. Your minimum asset required for a project is typically about 30%. And this is a perspective I want to share with you. If a client is coming to you with 10%, 15% of a down payment, and he's expecting to go into CMHC, at this point, you should verify whether or not he has additional resources because the lender is also going to do that. I think there's a common misconception that if you're doing a CMHC program, CMHC is going to be funding the money. That's not true. The money is actually funded by traditional regular lenders. So you've got MCAP, Meridian, you've got a number of credit unions that operate in the area. Concentra is one of them that does commercials. Um, all these lenders are what we call NHA lenders, National Housing Act approved lenders. And they're okay to fund transactions under CMHC. So CMHC is not funding the money. That's not CMHC's role. CMHC's role is to ensure the transaction and approve it so that if something were to happen, at least the bank's money is protected. So in those cases, you may be able to get away with up to 85 to 90%, depending on the location. However, you still need a fallback. So if you don't have a customer who's coming with at least 20 to 30%, even if it's not immediately usable, then that's a problem. What you can, however, use is a total number of equities in the property, even if it's not liquidatable. You can use that as a part of your total 30% of the project requirement. And at a later date, when we start reviewing and when we start talking to the client, there may be means of extracting that equity as and when required. So the lender and CMHC want to know, if this goes south, are you going to have enough to cover for overages, to cover for unforeseen incidents, to cover for any outstanding balances that may be applicable to the piece of land. T1s and NOAs are required. We need to confirm if CRA taxes are owed or not. It's not the end of the world, but it is required to verify that. And nowadays, even private lenders are verifying net worth. That means whatever you're putting on the application, keep in mind that there's going to be a back check that's done by a number of institutions. So if you're doing a development, for example, this is still going to go to Terry on for approval. If you're doing a CMHC transaction, then the lender and CMHC has a right to verify that, and they can simply fax out a document. So just don't put whatever you want to, put the real information so you know what's to be expected at a later date. It doesn't backfire. Okay, so we're going to talk about loan structuring. We're not going to go into specifics. It is fairly complicated to explain. There are a number of charts that you have to look at, and there are a number of programs that are there too. So to keep things simple, let's just talk about the factors and the kinds of programs. So the factors that affect your lender choice during file structuring, if you're building a project, or if you're buying a project that's already a 25 unit building, they want to understand how much exposure you have to the asset management. Asset management doesn't mean assets of dollar value. I'm talking about real property management, whether or not you can accommodate that or not, whether you have any experience in that or not, or even for that matter, building. They also want to know how much of the equity is available in the deal. So this is, again, one of the reasons why when you look at the appraisal outlines how much of equity is on the deal, which defines whether it's going to go into an A lender, or if it's going to be a B lender deal, or if it's going to be a private. Same process, but a little more detailed there. Your deal equity is something that can be calculated in case of a build in advance. So you can actually say, well, once I've achieved a certain value in progress, after having built, let's say, the foundation, or let's say having hired trades, or out of a 7-floor building, you've already built three floors, then you're sitting at a certain project stage. That project stage can still be counted as equity that you can use or extract for the purpose of moving on with the project. Value addition. So this, as an example, would be, I buy a piece of land, I service the land, I bring in hydro, water, and gas to it. I pay $15,000 to the city as a cost for bringing in those services, and I pay those $15,000 to these 3 different services that brought those services to my piece of lot, and I pay another $15,000 to the city for development charges. And the combination of those two lets you now submit a site plan. So if you've gotten to a stage where you're ready to submit a site plan, that means you've added value to that project. Before it was just core land, now it's developable land. And because of that, your value will increase. So those considerations also play a factor in what have you really done with the project so far. What is the stage of the project? This points back to, is it 33% complete? Is it 66% complete? Is it 89% complete? That percentage of completion can define how much of money you can access. We did a financing in Niagara. It was a $2 million property, and it's got a laundromat and it's got a number of apartment units upstairs. The number of apartment units upstairs are being renovated, so there's no rental income coming in. However, they are adding another section to it because that building burnt down. So instead of just building it as is, they decided, let's add another component to it. Let's expand on that. They went to the city, they got the permits, and they added an addition to it, which increased the building by almost 2,000 square feet. So that 2,000 square feet now produces an additional income of about $36,000 a year. And that is what allows you to determine at what project stage you're sitting at. So we ended up financing close to about $250,000, even though it was in construction phase 2, roughly about 50% complete. We ended up paying giving the $250,000 so he could complete the project for a 6-month duration so that we could get our money back. And that points to exit strategy. So every builder that is looking to fund you is looking to understand whether or not he's going to get his money back. So as far as an institutional lender is concerned, understand that it's going to be spread over, let's say, 30, 40, 50 years as an amortization. Yep, they have 50 years now. In case of those kind of transactions, that's a long-term strategy. At any point in time, if the payments get missed, the bank can literally put the property on the market and they should be able to sell that property. But if it's an incomplete project, am I going to be able to get out of it? If it's a private lender who's lending on land, what good is the land to that private lender if the private lender doesn't have exposure in development and building? So depending on who the builder is, depending on where the transaction lies and what the exit strategy is, you have to choose lenders that are comfortable with that transaction. What kind of programs are available across the board? So you have CMHC financing, which is typically rental units that you can finance. CMHC is not in the business of making you money. I've always maintained that. I've said that when you're buying a rental property, when you've already put down a 5% down and you're coming back a year later and you say, well, I want to buy another property at 5%. Yes, you can do that 100%, but CMHC is not in the business of making you money and making you equity. It's in the business of helping you build housing. That's what its main purpose is, or helping Canadians get into housing. All the programs that CMHC does are for the purpose of rental opportunities. You don't have Great West Homes or Mattamy, or not that these people would actually end up going to CMHC anyway, but you don't have these builders opting in for CMHC financing. They don't do that. They're doing conventional lending, which is the next alternative. So you put in $20 million, you've put in a significant amount of money in a $100 million project. You're going to be able to, if you have a track record, you should be able to get $80 million in financing for the purpose of building. The condo developments that you see failing at the moment are primarily because their sales didn't go so well, or they didn't have enough juice in the play for the property development, because of which time ran out. They didn't get the permits in time, and now they have to refund the monies back to the consumers that already put in the deposits. So if for any reason a condominium development does not get funded, if a condominium development does not get sold up to a minimum of 75 to 100%. So if there's 100 units, you should be able to sell at least 75 up to 100 units, depending on what your exposure is. And that's one of the underwriting criteria. You're not going to get financing. And that's one of the reasons why understanding institutional financing, whether it's going to MCAP, Meridian, or XYZ, which lender has the capacity to be able to hold this, which lender is going to be okay with the kind of property it is. Those angles can play well in explaining to the customer that these are the caveats, these are the problems, so you can work with them side by side and address those concerns before submission. Syndication is a process of two banks or two institutions putting their money together for the purpose of a single project. So I'm institution A, you're institution B. You have $50, I have $50. We put that $100 together and we loan it out, and we are both on the charge for equal value or in a percentage, whatever your percentage proration is, and that becomes syndication. Private mortgage funds, which is directly funded by a private lender. And then last, not the least, which is the most common one that we're looking at right now. And this is a primary source of funding in the current market. And the reason that's happening is because a lot of banks are sitting tight. The market may start improving over the next few months, but because of the number of condos that have been canceled and the number of bankruptcies that some of these developers have faced, and we all know how they operate, they're operating on a very high budget and a high expense. There's a lot of costs involved in trades. And let's say if they've put out $20 million towards a project and their project is now valued at $15 million because of the depreciation of the property value and the number of units. So 100 units that were going to bring back $20 million in revenue are now only going to bring back $15 million in revenue. The builder's like, I don't care. Let's move on. And the deposits are getting eaten up. So Terrion's getting a lot of calls about that. And there's a lot of pressure on the condominium market right now. So I'm using that as an example. It doesn't have to be condominium. It could be a number of developers that are doing single family detached homes. The same pressure applies because what happens is you end up getting financing for your project based on the number of units that you've actually sold. So going back to if you've sold 75% or 80% or 90%, you have a certain amount of deposit that you've collected from the prospective buyers, and that deposit and that validation of a purchase sale agreement that I will agree to buy this property 2 years down the road or 3 years down the road. Those documents are what are used for financing. And right now, because the sales are down, not a lot of people are buying. Inventory is just sitting on the market. That's why people are now opting to what we call exempt markets. So very brief description of exempt markets. The ability to raise capital without going public or without having to go to a banking institution where people like you and me would contribute 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, 100,000 towards a return. So when they invest in those types of investments, those investments are what we call exempt market. They operate under offering memorandum. They operate under a fund theory, which outlines what the description of that fund looks like, what is the use of that fund. So we have a lot of builders that are looking to build rental units and rental buildings that are raising money through the exempt markets to be able to obtain financing as a share from customers. And these customers are getting paid back anywhere between 7 to 12%, depending on how high risk, how outside the GTA market it is. Those are the returns that these individual customers are getting. So individual customers are categorized in 4 different kind of investor brackets. We're not too focused on that. But if you ever get a case scenario where the client, the customer said, oh, well, I'm not going to be able to get financing through CMHC. Institutional isn't doing very well right now, and private is capping me to 50% loan to value. So in situations like these, if there's an opportunity to move them into exempt market, we may be able to help them because we have access to the exempt markets as an exempt market dealer that allows us to be able to help them still raise capital, and we still have the ability to charge a fee for the purpose of the help that we're offering. If you guys have any questions that come up, please list them down. I'll come back to the questions eventually. I'm going to roll. I want to wrap it up. I know you guys are on a timeline too. So once I'm done with the presentation, then I'll address any of the questions that you guys have as well. Risk assessment. So when we have the use of land, purposes such as future use or how much value addition that you've applied to it, or what did the value go up by from 3 years ago to now, specific appraisal comments, for example, if you're doing a development land or if you're doing a commercial building, the neighborhood supports a large business audience, which will allow for this plaza to flourish. That kind of a note can be a positive note on the appraisal to help the lender understand that this is a good project to invest in. Same thing applies with environmental. Unfortunately, we have not assessed the environmental requirements. Requirements has a typo in it. Um, those comments have to be read. You need to read the report when you're looking at one. And that will help you understand whether or not this is a deal that we can complete or not. So if you run into problems, if you have questions, isolate that, get me a screenshot, send it to me. I'll help you understand what it is. Lending is entirely depending on risk. When mitigating a file, make sure that you have all the documents you need ahead of time so that the lender has a full access to the file instead of just looking at the appraisal and then looking at something else. 9 out of 10 times, and I say this with appreciation for the ones that do listen, if you don't send out a full package for private with very specific notes on who, what, why, how, when, where, it will fall through. We just need the bullet points and we just need 3 documents and we don't need anything else when you're sending out a file. The same thing applies to this as well. But instead of writing essays, provide all the documents that confirm whether this project is going to be feasible or not. And then we're going to take a look at some of the worksheets that can be used to determine that for the purpose of the lender, so the lender is not sitting there for 4 hours keying in that information. That's something that you can work with the investor or the customer with as well, or you can pass it on to the customer, have them complete it, and they can get back to you. But collect the full load of documents so you have everything up front. Send it out as a single package, just the appraisal at the very beginning. If you get an interest just based on the appraisal, then send out the rest of the paperwork. So the letter of intent can be made available for qualifying deals. So that the client can be secured while the lender evaluates the file. What that means is we talked about the letter of intent being issued by the brokerage. So that allows you to be able to collect a retainer, assure that this client's not going to be walking away. And that gives you some level of assurance and guarantee that if the lender is looking at it, we have the ability to shop it with a number of people, whether this deal is going to get done or not. We can always give the retainer back if for any reason the deal is not getting done, and that's just a straight up standard process. However, the retainer does put you in a position of security so that the client is committed to working with you. Every single commercial deal that we did not collect a retainer on fell through. And every single commercial deal that we did collect a retainer on went through successfully. So that's the difference in understanding why letter of intents are so important. Okay, so that covers that. I had one more note on this that I wanted to make, but I think I forgot it. If it comes back to me, I'll let you guys know. Financial analysis. So rent roll, DSR, NOI, cap rate, financial statements, just a brief description of what they are. You will find some of these documents inside of commercial mortgages under worksheets. So rent roll, you can just download online. It's simply a list of total expected or current active tenancies deriving the gross income for the project. Net operating income is all your expenses subtracted from all your revenues. So rather, all your revenues. No, I said it right the first time. All your expenses deducted from your gross income, from the total rental income that you've achieved, ends up being your net operating income once all expenses are paid. So there's an actual formula for that. DSR or DCR, I wanted to offer you a formula. I think Rosie forgot to plug in the formula. So Google DSR or DCR formulas, they're there. Very simple calculations. You actually find calculators online if you wanted to understand. So what is DCR or DSR? Debt service ratio. What that means is if your monthly mortgage payment expected at $15,000 is what you're going to be paying per month to the mortgage company or the lender, that means you should be sitting at least a 1.2 to 1.4 of a percentage as far as income is concerned. So unless you have an income, a gross income of at least $21,000 or $19,000, you're not going to qualify. That's what DCR or DSR means. Do you have the ability to service the debt? The cap rate is the understanding of what the value would look like if you're getting a certain amount of rent out of the entire building. So if I'm getting X dollars out of the building as rental income, what is my actual value of the building? Because this is an investment, the cap rate points to how much of a value can be derived based on the amount of money that this building makes. Financial statements, standard, they're T2s or accountant prepared notice to reader, including the business financials for the past 2 years, just to determine the business performance. So in that, if you struggle to understand what they are, there's a nice nifty tool that analyzes your business financials. It's under the ChatGPT platform. You upload them and it assesses a narrative on how the company is performing using those numbers. But generally speaking, you should be able to tell what your assets are, what your liabilities are, whether your profit was a positive or whether you were in loss. Okay, so we talked about raising capital. You have non-traditional or alternative ways of raising funds. We talked about putting in JVs, which is known as joint ventures. So one of the opportunities that you have is when you are speaking with a number of people, you're also being introduced to new customers that have a like-mindedness of operation or business, but don't have the ability to network and connect with each other. So I had a case scenario where I had two separate clients. The Mister was running a renovation company, and the lady that I was working with, she was an investor who wanted to uh, opt in for a multiple number of rental opportunities and single tenancy units. So when I put those guys together, that actually opened up my business because what it did was connect the right people together so they could work together. And they both rely on me, and it just increased the number of transactions for me. So the renovator ended up finding properties for this investor, and the investor ended up buying these properties. And I used their equities to be able to create a partnership for them so that part of the money is coming in from the investor, part of the money is coming in from the contractor, and both those monies put together, they did almost like 7 or 8 properties in Toronto. They still own those properties, and they were able to make at least $150,000 to $200,000 in each one of those properties. This was about maybe 3 years ago. So now they're just coming back every now and then, just refinancing them for equity takeouts. But that's a beautiful way of creating an opportunity. Just because an investor doesn't have access to the money or the funds doesn't mean you can't use and leverage your position in the equation to introduce them together to be able to create business out of it. We've talked about exempt market. Exempt market allows you to be able to raise capital on a private level, but legally, without getting into trouble. It only requires an exempt market dealer to be able to review the offering memorandum and then work with a lawyer to create an OM, which allows a company to be able to raise capital for the product that they're looking for. You can do that for technology, you can do that for real estate, you can do that for anything you want to. Exempt market is a broad term that encompasses just the ability to raise capital under private exempt markets. Cost of borrowing, very important component. So right now, because of the interest rate, the construction rates are hovering about 10 to 12 to 14% on private. And people are not really interested in those kind of opportunities, and they're just sitting tight. That's the other reason you don't see a lot of projects going up. So the interest rate did more harm than good, but if someone is having to spend 12 to 14% as a borrowing cost on 20 or $30 million to complete a project, the economies of scale just don't make any sense. And that's why sometimes they back out of a project. So sometimes cost of borrowing can be reduced by helping negotiate a deal between private lenders, or using exempt market dealers to be able to dock it, or for that matter, if the deal qualifies, then helping the client understand whether this is something you can channel into a CMHC product or an institutional product with a bank. Okay, so this is important for you guys to know and understand. The pressure is on at the moment for anyone and everyone who's a builder. And we all understand the massive opportunity to make money on the opportunity of being able to build. They're committing to, just so you guys know, the iPad seems to be upside down. Anyway, that's my OCD talking. Um, Builders are being motivated by CMHC, and there was a release about a week ago where what used to be a maximum amortization of about 30 to 35 to 40 at some times, and they're very picky on offering those opportunities, those financing options. Now they've actually gone up to almost 50 years of amortization. What that does for you is, even though the interest rate is higher for qualification, it still reduces the cost of borrowing for you in the interim timeline for cash flow. So where the payment would have been $15,000, now it's about $10,000 or $11,000, which helps cash flow. These are the ways where builders are being encouraged to build more. Another example would be a lot of apartment buildings are being repurposed. Some of them are dated, some of them need improvements. So CMHC has stepped in, and CMHC is offering renovation programs as well, where you can opt for 5, 10, $15 million, and you can submit the deal with CMHC to get an approval. It's not just renovation, it's not building. There are some programs specific to apartment buildings, which are under the MLI program, which also help the builder get into a rental apartment building for as little as about 10 to 15% down payment. And again, just because it means 10 to 15% or the program says 10 to 15% doesn't automatically mean that that's the extent of what you're going to have to put out. You should have a little bit of a buffer available, but CMHC is in the mentality and has approved. The last deal that we did was April. It was close to about, I think, 11 or $15 million, and that helped us. The CMHC program helped us qualify that. The changes had not come through back then, but we were still able to fund that deal with the current circumstances because they're very flexible right now. They want to see action, but then again, those prerequisites must be in place. So let's talk about those prerequisites. So this is a conversation that I was having about rental buildings that you're creating. For carry-on warranty program, it's a little different. Carry-on warranty comes into play when you have to entirely build a project by yourself for residential and resale. So all the pre-constructions that you see, they all have to go through a carry-on warranty assessment before they can actually start selling the project. So anyone who shies away from that, or if some builder comes back to you and says, I want a project done, I'm looking for financing, get me the financing, but I'm not approved yet with carry-on warranty, then the lender is not actually going to fund you until you are approved. You may get a letter of intent out of it, you may even get a commitment out of it, but they're not going to fund you until you actually get approved and the shovel's on ground. So because of those reasons, you have to understand what the warranty stands for. When you're doing a development, once the city has verified, yes, you can build this project, now you take that project back to Terrion and you submit Terrion an evaluation of what you're looking to do, or a complete package of what you're looking to do. In this assessment, they look at you, they look at your project, they look at your background experience, they look at your pro forma, they look at your sensitivity analysis, and we'll talk about that before they can say, okay. All of this ties into the right-hand side, which is, again, a very minimal screenshot of what we call a budget or a pro forma. The budget of the pro forma is an outline of all your soft costs and your hard costs that make up the development of a single project. So soft costs are categorized as land, any cost that you pay towards servicing, development charges, and so on and so forth, trades, site plan, permits, and anything that's hard cost ends up being from the time that you actually start developing and you, let's say, serviced it, installed cables, and you're wanting to get the project started, the foundation is being laid down. All of those angles end up being your commercial, I apologize, end up being your hard costs. So the combination of the two, this specific Excel sheet is available in the worksheet section under commercial mortgages under worksheets. So look at it, get used to it, get comfortable with it. If you were to share this when you're doing your initial conversation, not only is the client going to feel that you're bringing value to the table, it's also going to provide them with guidance. And if they don't already have it, they will rely on you. Otherwise, generally speaking, if it's a regular builder who knows what they're doing, or if it's even if it's an apartment building, you still need a pro forma. And in case of a sensitivity analysis is determining the best price to sell per square footage. So the sensitivity analysis translates into a rental investment analysis when you're building an apartment building, and it's known as sensitivity analysis when you're building a condominium for the purpose of sale. The last thing that I forgot on the last slide was these costings cannot be on a per square footage basis by the GC alone, which is a general contractor. So the GC can't come back and say, oh, I'm going to charge $1.25 per square foot for this kind of a build. It's not based on that. It's based on what we call a cost consultant. So there are about 5 cost consultants that the industry uses. Those 5 cost consultants are responsible for a lot of data that they have in their systems, and they peg it on the basis of where you are, how far you are from the GTA, how close you are to Toronto, where the warehouses are for the materials, where the labor is coming in from, and all of those angles present you with an estimate of a per square footage rate for all of your trades and all of your supplies, which finally then comes up to what we also call a 16 divisional. A 16 divisional is a more elaborate form of your pro forma or a budget, which allows the lender to evaluate the project and determine whether or not this is going to be a good project to work with. Part of these are available in your worksheet folder. CMHC Apartment Construction Loan Program. You guys are going to have access to this under the CMHC folder inside of commercial mortgages, but I just want to focus on a few points so that you understand what exactly is their mandate, what are they trying to do. They're trying to create a financial option for financing, and they're trying to trigger affordable housing. They're focused, because of the current government and in general, for energy efficient product or energy efficient units come into being, come into housing, and they're focused heavily on accessibility. If the build is taking into consideration these 4 angles, that it's going to be priced right, it's going to be widely available, it's going to be energy efficient, and it's going to be accessible. Handicap accessibility is being considered when you're building it. They actually have a very specific program for construction that lets you go up to the 95% LTV ratio as well. What do you need to qualify for this? Not any Tom, Dick, and Harry can get into it. And that's one of the reasons why it's a little harder, because checking off all those 4 points can be hard as a singular project. But it is applicable to anyone who wants to develop. You must have experience for the last 5 years. And I want to comment on that. So I'll use my example or our example. We haven't been a builder for the last 5 years. We're building our first project for the first time. We've been working on it for the last 2 to 3 years, but we haven't had the experience for the last 5 years. And there is a lot of opportunities in the market that you can explore for these customers, which I'm going to take you to in a few minutes, where you can find a builder who has that experience and still qualify for these programs. So you don't have to be a builder. Technically, you don't want to deal with the building part to it anyway. It's just a lot of management and mismanagement and costs. So if you do it yourself and you don't know what you're doing, you can actually run into a deficit. So for that reason, if you're working with a veteran builder and you're basically trying to be a developer and you have access to a piece of land or a few $1 million and you want to make big in the industry, this is where you can outshine and you can help that client transition into a full-scale developer, which is where the money is. So what we like to say is we actually double our money every year if you're a builder. So if a builder is interested in that opportunity and he's coming in with, let's say, $5 million of an asset value, he will double his money every year. So if it takes 4 years to build a condo, he's going to walk away with $20 million essentially at the end of the project. And that is why this is such a lucrative opportunity to work with people for and educate people on. 3-year history for positive cash flow is required, which is standard. You can be a regular company. The 3-year history doesn't apply if you just opened the company a year ago. So there are different caveats to it, but there are other considerations as well. So when you have a client along those lines, if you're running into issues, call me, send me the basic details, and we'll discuss it. Just a very basic understanding of what their criteria, just the broad level. So the minimum loan amount is $1 million. They'll go up to 90 to 100% loan to cost. And for non-res, they'll go up to 75%. They do 100% loan to cost for projects with top social outcomes. And that's what I was referring to. If you have someone that's building a project that's accommodating and energy efficient, those projects will get up to 100% of loan to cost. Loan to cost basically means whatever your cost is to build this, we'll pay for it. And we'll amortize it for 50 years. So if I buy the land for $2 million and I need $20 million to finance this, I'll get the $20 million. And those are the programs that we work on. So up to 50 years, no premium surcharge because it's insured. The premium is actually paid for by, no, I apologize. So the premium is actually paid for, there's part premium that's paid by the lender and part of the premium is paid by the customer as well. But the premium is under 2 to 3%. So if you're getting $20 million and 100% financing, it's a no-brainer. The loan may be advanced up to 100% of the cost during the construction. No rental achievement applies. That basically means during the loan duration as construction, because there are no rental units available or existing for the rental accommodation, that condition doesn't apply until you've actually built out that entire building. Okay, I think the heading is incorrect. I'm just going to talk about how they service the property. So this slide is intended for what exactly do you need to submit a file for CMHC qualification. So generally speaking, for residential, you want to see a 1.1. We actually like to see a 1.2, and we work with the numbers to get that because we know how to tweak the file to the benefit of the client for the approval. The applications are qualified with an interest rate that is higher than 2%, so stress testing applies to it. However, you'll notice that the amortization is much higher, so there's a little bit of an impact on that. The spread is determined by the CMHC. The spread is essentially the difference between what the going rate is for BOC and what the lender can actually charge. So if the lender wants to lend at that specific spread, they're going to allow for that to happen. Should the lender want to charge maybe a 2% spread, then it's up to CMHC whether they're going to permit that or not. And that permission comes from how badly do you need housing right now? And we need it pretty bad right now. So they're fairly flexible on that. Security types, so we do first, second, pari passu, which is also another terminology for blanket. Mortgages are permitted. Reserve requirements, so you don't have to put in a reserve of $1 million while you're doing the build. So there are no minimum requirements for the reserves, maximum requirements for the reserves. Premium is not payable by the borrower. So that's a little incorrect because in some cases, the premiums are partially paid by the borrower as well as the lender. However, the PST is always paid by the borrower. Just as a clarification, so in some cases, premiums can actually be added onto your loan amount. So in that case, you're not going to be payable. They're not going to be payable right off the bat, but in some cases, they're still going to be payable. Okay, so I'm going to disregard the left-hand side, which is to do with interest rates, and I'm going to focus on the right-hand side. The interest rates fluctuate. They go by bond rates across the market. You don't actually get an exact rate until 3 to 4 days prior to the funding date because we have to look up the exact rate that's going to be applicable to the bond market. Um, if it's a 5 year or 10 year or a 3 year or whatever term you're choosing. Because the amortization is about 50 years, you actually end up choosing sometimes 5 to 10 years or 11 years, or sorry, 15 years as well. So there are those programs available as well. So application fees. So payable at the time of underwriting. Before you submit the deal, sometimes there will be a request to pay the fees for CMHC underwriting or for commercial underwriting for the lender as well. What are the fees? They generally go for, disregard what's written here. The assumption is you're going to be looking at 100 to 200 bucks per unit. So if you've got 100 units times $100, that's what you're looking at as a unit fee, depending on what the location is. So non-residential, you end up paying close to about 30 basis points for non-residential loans over $100,000. Sorry, over $1 million. If the amount of application fees that you're paying are over $100,000, it automatically jumps to the sliding scale. So we also charge lender and broker fees. We don't get a payout on the lending from the lender on these transactions. So we have to charge an actual fee. So what kind of fees does the lender and the broker charge? So the retainer could be, let's say, 25 basis points of the requested amount. It's negotiable. Lender fees are typically about up to 1%. It could be 60, 70, 80, 100 basis points. I've seen 25, I've seen 50 basis points. They're always there. Every single commercial transaction has a lending fee. And CMHC, and broker fees vary depending on your negotiation, obviously, and the amount of effort that you've applied. Anywhere between 50 basis points to 100 basis points. Okay, so the borrower net worth, their criteria is you need to have at least 25% of the loan amount being requested with a minimum of $100,000. So clearly $100,000 as a minimum threshold doesn't work here. Every build that you're going to do or every financing you're going to do for an apartment is going to be at least in a few $1,000,000. So you're going to have at least 25% of that. Flexibility in CMHC standard net worth programs may be available. Guarantee requirements. Borrowers and guarantors must 100% guarantee the loan, which means it's going to be a personal guarantee, and rent up. Post rent up, the loan may become non-recourse for deficiencies. CMHC may require additional risk mitigation like equity retention reserves and collaterals or personal guarantees. This basically means if you're not a veteran, if you don't have exposure in the industry, you're not going to be out of the mess just because it's under a corporation. It's going to be a personal guarantee, and they will require you to pony up the money so that you can complete the build should there be anything going in the wrong direction for a build. Examples like foundation has to be redone. There was a leak in the ground and the water table rose, and because the water table rose, you actually have to put out, let's say, $600,000 of foundation cost by breaking it and then adding another foundation layer to it, which could be, let's say, $1 million. So that $1 million is coming out of your pocket, and that is why you have to bring that amount to the table. They're not responsible for any delinquencies in the performance of that build. So we do multi-residentials, 4 units or more, $750,000 or more. We've actually done less. We do construction for 5 units or more, for $1 million or more. We do commercial and retail for anything over $500,000. So if it's a shell unit, or if it's a restaurant, or if it's a condominium, a low rise, or just a renovation, we do all of those. So what do we have expertise in. So we recently did a 400 unit condo project. It was also vacant land, and the loan capacity, well, it wasn't recently, it was like a year and a half ago, but we did it for $125 million. So the deals are out there. And again, when I show you how to source them or how to bring contacts in, you'll understand how this is such a lucrative opportunity. And again, it goes back to tying into what do you know? What can you talk about? What can you have a conversation about? What can you actually discuss with a client that he's going to understand that, yes, you're up to par, you should be able to manage this. All they really want to know is whether you can do it or not. And if you can't do it, you at least have a team that can get it done, which is all the more important for you to explain to the client that, listen, we have a team dedicated to commercial, and this is why we're experts at it. What's funny is that we have in Canada, we have close to about 4 or 5 people or individuals or groups um, that are excellent at commercial lending, especially builder projects and apartment rental projects from the ground up. And the Rate Shop team is actually a part of those 4 or 5 people that actually know what they're doing. Otherwise, and the reason I say that is because we actually end up getting a lot of deals from other brokerages through LendMax and otherwise that ask us to help them with financing. And because it's just a few people, we actually know on the other side who else is doing it, and we coordinate with them. They coordinate with us, so we know where the file has been. We know the inside out of the operation and the business as well. It's not to say that other people can do it or other people haven't done it. All I'm saying is that we have a lot of exposure here, so it is a good stepping stone to get into, because if you're doing commercial, you don't need to do residential at all. So we also excel at conventional construction, which is done with institutions. So whether it's Meridian, we know them. Whether it's the private lenders, we know them. MCAP, we know them. CMLS, we know them. We have people in almost every institution that will work with us, that will get the deal done, provided the criteria meets up. And that's where you guys come in so that you can vet it and assess it and figure out whether that's a doable deal with us or not. So with LMC equity takeout loan for 500 to 20 mil, LMC does not do those loans. I don't know why there's a typo there, but we do equity takeout loans anywhere between 500 to 20 mil. Custom solutions to large hurdles, construction not being completed, ran into issues, change in management, or construction company went bust, takeover. So all of those options are available to us. Consistently available capital. So though we are tight today, if a deal comes up and if it's got meat on the bones, we will look at it. We will find the lender for it. Condo inventory financing. So a lot of these condos that were going up recently in the past year have been transitioned into from being built for the purpose of sale, which is typically done because once you sell it, you get the full amount of money back. And they're being transitioned into CMHC loans for the purpose of an apartment building. And the caveat is you don't actually get your full money back, and you're not allowed to sell it for a certain number of years of duration, but that still gives you the opportunity to build a project. And at some point in time, you can ask for angel investors to come in and you can get liquidated out of it as well. So we also work with multi-residential constructions. So what you guys need to know is a lot of your point of contacts are going to be people who are just inquiring about, hey, I was looking at a piece of land to build, or I'm in the process of a survey and I want to add services. Do you know someone that does that? So your group of companies, Greencrest Homes does that. Greencrest Homes is also connected to well-established builders and well-established GCs that also do that. So though we may not have the capacity between Michael and I with the workloads that we have, we still have the capacity to be able to refer it out and make a buck on it, which is why I would like you guys to leverage all the companies that you guys have access to for the purpose of standing out. Not a lot of brokerages have access to something along that. I'm not familiar with one single brokerage that's also um, the volume broker status. That's primary business is mortgages and also ends up being a developer. So if you want to use that to your leverage, I think it's a great idea to present yourself as that. So affordable housing programs available through CMHC, up to 90% of cost available, and CMHC takeover opportunities as well. What that means is if you're building a res or non-res, those deals are fairly easy to crank out should the DCR work out. And they do work out because the going rate right now, even paid by subsidized housing, is enough to accommodate at least a 9 to 10% of a yield. So automatically, if your rate is sitting at about a 7.5 on an insured mortgage on commercial, you're still going to be making 2 to 3 points above. That means you're still better off. Your DCR is still going to be higher than the 1.1, which is a minimum requirement. I love plazas. I really do. So plazas, so easy, so convenient. It's a very small foundation. It's not a lot of environmental requirements. It's very easy to sell and market. You don't need Tarion at all. And you just create shell units. You don't even create the actual store on the inside because the one who's buying it builds it to suit. And you just create the outside. Like I'm looking at the two pictures are the exact same. I don't know why though, but the picture on the right hand side is what we financed out of Kitchener. Um, and it was a $20 million project. We actually financed, we didn't finance the project. We financed a couple of people, actually 3 deals, I think, valued at roughly about 900 to $1.4 million, each one of those retail store units and slash office uses. And we got 65 to 75% in LTV. So these are beautiful to operate. When you have a deal, I'll show you how to underwrite it. So it's nice and cookie cutter. If you have questions, call me about it. Don't shy away from these opportunities. You won't talk about it, you won't get the clients. The more you express it, if you use this picture on your Facebook ad, looking for commercial financing, looking for commercial mortgage, start here. We just funded $1.1 million. If you use that kind of an ad, you're going to get a lot of traction there. All right, now finding business. There are multiple ways to do that. The conversation is the starting point. However, if you're running into issues where you don't know where to start, this is my starting point. Every time I take a break and I'm starting over, I start dialing and I start connecting with people. On the right-hand side, you're going to see, so this is a screenshot for the HCRA website. The HCRA website is available to anyone and everyone. You'll take a look. Its results are 47,000 builders found. A lot of them are expired. A lot of them don't exist anymore. But that doesn't mean it's not an opportunity to pick up the phone and call them. So the pitch is, so I'll go through the offer first. I'm working with the top commercial lenders, and we have projects that were approved under CMHC. I'm wondering if you have some time to discuss the apartment build and reno financing options for your clients so that you are aware of what options and financing can be made available for your client if they're approaching you for a build. So all these people were at some point in time Tarion warranty builders, or they found Tarion too invasive or too annoying because of which they dropped the license. And what you're doing is you're not focusing on the Madamis or the Losanis or the bigger builders. You're focusing on the smaller Mickey Mouse operations with just 1 or 2 people. And you're calling them out, you're connecting with these people to make sure that you are the person they know of when it comes to financing. So the pitch is, hi, my name is Ali. I have a client who's interested in a development project. I was doing some research on who I can recommend as a builder. Are you still practicing? Are you still approved with Tarion right now? Okay, awesome. So I came across your profile on ACRA's platform and I wanted to reach out. Do you currently have any active projects? What kind of clients do you currently service? What budgets do you work with? What builds do you specialize in? Would you be open to meet and work on some opportunities together? Are you open to a webinar for some of my clients so they can understand the process of construction? And 9 out of 10 times, this conversation opens you up into a multitude of conversations. Oh, I have a builder who's doing a custom. Can I share your phone number with him? He's looking to get a private for 6 months. We just want to make sure that he's taken care of. Yeah, no problem. We can help him out. Oh, have you guys done this kind of a building before? Yes, we have. So when you start having those conversations with these guys, they know you as a subject matter expert because not many people um, socialize, or not many people um, advertise as commercial experts. The information that you've shared with me today here gives you enough of leverage, and this is something that we're going to make available for the Learn system as well. So if you want to go back to it and then go through it again, we'll make it happen. It's only going to be available to the people that did access it. However, when you go through this, take some of the key points, make your own tiny little one pager so you know what content to share, what not to share. And using that content, I can assure you that your clients are going to be impressed with the knowledge and the base information that you have. We're not focused on underwriting, but the first 2, 3 phone calls don't end up doing that anyway. It's simply about getting the conversation started. And by being a part of this presentation, you should be able to achieve that very successfully. So in effort of educating everyone, because this is a specialized section of mortgages in Canada, we are going to do another one. We just have to work on getting the specifics outlined. So what we're going to be talking about in our next session is specific to commercial underwriting, is what are lenders actually funding? What do cost consultants do as a part of the role? We'll also open up a couple of worksheets and see what options we have to explore so we can tweak them or work with the clients on them. We're also going to understand how deposits work, bonding and insurance works. You guys don't have to have a customer who's building a 16-floor project. You can have a builder who's only building one home valued at 1.4, 1.6, or 2.5 as a custom home, and he's still going to need the education that you have so that he can be guided to the end. CMHC programs at length. We want to talk about the two specific programs that are a priority. One is the apartment rental and the other one is MLI. Feel free to Google them, search them. I just want to show you guys, I don't know if I can bring it over, but I'm going to try to. So under worksheets, you're going to find the TD rental, retrofit, and rest real estate investment analysis as an Excel sheet. I think there was one more. I think it got removed, but we'll upload it again. So in this one in particular, you're going to notice it's got a very detailed tab-based spreadsheet. This is not what we call a 16 divisional. A 16 divisional is a little more intricate, but this helps you share very important information with your client. And specific tabs can actually be used as individual Excel sheets that I would, like I said earlier, recommend for you to have as a lead gen tool so that people can download it, leave their phone numbers, and then you can connect with them. We actually have a folder that we've been working on. So there's a very specific checklist of what's required for your CMHC financing, a very detailed guide on step-by-step. So feel free to look into that as well. And this is a very detailed table on what kind of programs are available. So the ones that we're actually focused on are just these ones. Okay, so it's apartment loan construction and the MLI program. So as long as you know this, you don't have to worry about the rest of them. There's a very underserved market for the rest of them. So you should be fine, but it'll give you clarity on how you can progress to the next stage by just using this guide. So with that in mind, I appreciate you guys coming out, attending the webinar. I'm hoping it was beneficial. Before we let this go, does anyone have any questions that I can answer? I will take that as a no. Appreciate you guys staying all the way to the end. It is a requirement. I don't want to keep saying that, but I'm just being honest. I'm hoping, I know every one of you guys is going to go back and say, okay, well, there was at least like 50% or 60% of the content that I didn't know. and I'm happy I know it now. But that's something that I want you guys to maintain and apply for all the trainings, because the more repetition you have, the more conscious reiteration you can do before your clients. And that knowledge is what's going to put you above. When people talk to me, and I know you guys, some of you look up to me because I have the knowledge. I have the knowledge because I do a lot of reading on it and I actually dig into it. And that's what gives me the confidence to be able to talk to a client. I want you guys to have the same confidence. You may not know everything, but as long as you know some of it, you can hold the conversation, and that's where you get started with a lead gen. Thank you so much for joining in. We'll talk to you guys soon. Ciao.